That music is always a great way to start my morning or afternoon. And welcome in, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I'm your virtual adventure guide here with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Now, we have a tremendous new audience today. The Waterton Lakes team put this out on their social media pages, and we, I think, have all of Alberta joining us in the broadcast today. So welcome in across the province, across the country, and internationally as well. If you are new to us at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And every so often, we get the chance to partner with an amazing organization to do some really great programs together. And that is the case today as we continue our Peak Discovery series in conjunction with the amazing teams at Canada's mountain parks. Now, Alberta and British Columbia are not just some of the most beautiful places in Canada, but some of the most beautiful places in the entire world. And so we get the thrill every year of partnering with them on an incredible broadcast series showcasing their biodiversity, their cultural heritage, and so much more. We did our BAT program with them back in October. You can check that one out on our YouTube channel, and we've got a couple more to wrap up the semester in the weeks to come that I'll share at the end as well. Now, before I get underway with today's topic, I want to note we do have a Kahoot today. So between our talk and our Q&A, if you want to join us with a little 5-question quiz, have a little fun, test your knowledge, show how much you love today's program, that is our game pin. I'll make sure everybody has that between now and the end as well, but feel free to join us with that. Now, we're really lucky today because we are diving back in with a friend of ours from last year, Dylan Frank, and he is an archaeologist at Waterton Lakes National Park. This is, again, just a really stunning area. And in 2017, they had a fire pass through that opened up the possibilities of exploring and learning about ancient or sort of people that have lived on the land for thousands and thousands of years. So I'm really excited to dive in with archaeology. This is a topic we don't often feature on the broadcast. And so you guys are in for a real treat today as we learn a little bit about what they get up to in Waterton Lake. So Dylan, thank you so much for joining us today, man, and take us away.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. Oki, nisto nitanako, akawa misatu mistakist. Hello, my name is Dylan Frank, and I'm an archaeologist with Parks Canada in Waterton Lakes National Park. So before we start, I want to do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are in the traditional territories of the Siksikaitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, which consists of the following nations: Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, and Amskapi Piikani. Waterton Lakes National Park falls within Treaty 7 territory, which also includes Tsuut'ina Nation, Stoney Nakoda, which consists of the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley bands. The Ktunaxa Nation also claim Waterton as their traditional territory, and the Métis Nation Region 3 Association also claim Waterton as being part of their homeland. The lands and waters of Waterton have been used for millennia by Indigenous peoples for sustenance and ceremony and trade and travel. We thank them for their continuous stewardship and for sharing the land with us. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm an archaeologist. I'm also a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy, or the Kainai Nation to be more specific. I grew up in a small town to the east of the park, so working here has pretty much been a dream. My interest in archaeology first started when I was about 10 years old. My parents brought me out fishing one day with them, and during the trip, my mom actually found a beautiful spear point that you can see in the right photo there. And later we found out that it was about 9,000 to 10,000 years old, which blew my mind. It was just crazy to think about. So one thing that I want to make clear from the very start, archaeologists don't dig up dinosaurs. That's actually the job of other scientists called paleontologists. Archaeology is the study of human history through physical material left behind by people. So pretty much anything left behind by humans is of interest to me and my coworkers. And in Canada, anything made before the year 1950 is considered an artifact. Artifacts can be either pre-contact, which is before Europeans came to Canada, proto-contact, which is before Europeans, but when their trade goods arrived to the area, or post-contact, after Europeans. Examples of pre-contact artifacts are items like arrowheads and stone tools. Proto-contact artifacts are items like metal arrowheads and tiny little glass trade beads. And post-contact artifacts are usually glass and metal items like bottles and old machinery. Many people only see us archaeologists when we're out in the field doing field work such as digging or surveying, which makes it look like the only thing we do, but there's actually a lot more to it. The job consists of lots and lots of extensive research, lab work, data processing on the computer, and tons of report writing. There are a couple different types of archaeology, which are called cultural resource management, and that's usually done by private or construction companies. And then there's also academic-based, which is usually run through schools like universities. Parks Canada archaeology is unique because it's a little bit of both, so it makes my job even funner. So the story of Waterton starts about 10,000 years ago, when the glaciers were melting and the ice started to leave the area. Since new land was exposed, tons and tons of new plants started to grow. In some places, grasslands covered as far as the eye could see. These grassy places attracted animals who wanted an easy meal. This grassland ecosystem on the edge of the mountains contained a lot of different types of life and diversity. Early humans noticed this and began to frequent the area to gather edible plants and also to hunt animals. Humans would often use tools or leave an impact on the environment from their interactions with the ecosystems by leaving bits and pieces from their work. Think of someone leaving behind clues at a crime scene, and in this case, the clues are the artifacts we mentioned earlier. Artifacts help us solve mysteries of the past. They tell us what people did and how they did it, depending on the type of artifact. Some artifacts found in the park have been dated to about 10,000 years ago. So I mentioned animals that followed plants as they grew back after the Ice Age, but does anyone know what kind of animal was the most important to people? I have a little hint on the screen there. It's the bison. Some people call these animals buffalo, which is, some people call these creatures buffalo, which is actually an animal found in Africa and Asia. The Blackfoot people call them ini, and they're extremely important to every aspect of Blackfoot lives. They're part of ceremonies, their behavior provides life lessons, and they give us food, clothing, and shelter. What else could we ask for from an animal? In Waterton, evidence of bison continues to be found all across the park. Before colonization and the creation of the national park system, extremely large herds of this animal used to roam the grasslands, with numbers reaching into the millions. That's quite a lot of them. In order to capture and kill some of these animals, people made clever traps to trick them. Bison jumps and pounds were some of the methods that were used here, and there's even one area in the park that still shows the rock piles or cairns that were used for this type of hunt. The large herds began to disappear in the late 1800s, but the story of the bison is still alive and well in Waterton. The main evidence we found of bison was their skulls. The reason we found these parts more than any other is because they are some of the thickest bones in the bison's bodies. When the Kenow fire first came through, which we'll talk about shortly, other smaller bone pieces were burnt to a crisp because it got so hot. Even the thick skulls were damaged, but at least we were able to tell what those pieces still are. Our team found about 85 skulls over the last few seasons that we've done field work, which is quite a bit for such a small little area. By studying how the skulls were distributed, we can understand the migration and grazing habits of the animals, which can help us in future research. One example is that many skulls were found near some aspen stands, which tend to get pretty swampy when there's a lot of rain, which could attract the bison to that area. Radiocarbon dating is a scientific way of determining how old something is, and it can be done on bone. But in Waterton, radiocarbon dating doesn't seem to work too well because the fire burnt everything too much, and if we try to do the radiocarbon dating, it gives inaccurate results. This map right here shows where all the bison skulls were found in the park. You can see that they favored the lower, easier to travel areas, such as the mountain passes, just like people do. By studying information like this, we can learn so much more about the bison and ourselves. As I mentioned earlier, people used drive lanes to trick the bison. These drive lanes were long, steep, snake-like hills that often had a rock pile on the top or even a person to act as a barrier to the animals. When the bison started running, they would take the path of least resistance, which was usually right into a trap that was set by the people. Sometimes there would be a cliff at the end of the lanes, so the animals would fall to their death, and other times they would run straight into a pool of water where they couldn't get away from the people that were waiting on the other side. These pictures show an overhead view of parts of the drive lanes, highlighted in red, as well as examples of the different rock piles called cairns. So this brings us to August 30th of 2017. On that day, a very large thunderstorm had been hitting the mountains to the west of Waterton Lakes National Park, which was pretty normal weather for the Rockies at that time of year. The thing that wasn't normal, however, was that it had been a very hot and dry summer, an extremely windy day, and several years without a fire. And so a bolt of lightning struck down near the Kenow Mountain, which is in British Columbia, and that ignited a fire. In just a few days, the fire began spreading to the east because the wind had picked up, and by September 11th, it spread into the park boundaries. Lots and lots of brave firefighters managed to save many of the buildings in the park, including the Prince of Wales Hotel that you can see there in the top right photo. In total, about 39% of the area in the park burnt, and 285 of a known 366 archaeological sites at the time were affected. And as a result, Parks Canada initiated a 5-year archaeology program to assess the damage done to the cultural resources that we have here in the park. This photo is a map of the burn severity of the Kenow Wildfire. 19,000 hectares of land burnt. The topsoil and vegetation were completely removed, which was great for us archaeologists because it gave us a once-in-a-lifetime visibility of the ground, and it made it much, much easier to find artifacts. However, it also caused the natural erosion processes to happen much faster because there were no plant roots to hold anything together anymore. Because of the increased erosion, archaeological sites have been damaged and in some cases completely destroyed. Artifacts were also greatly affected. Rocks were shattered by the heat, bone was melted and warped, and features such as old roads were exposed, which can lead to increased erosion of these important things for archaeologists. These photos show an old metal wagon, a bison jawbone, the old visitor center that we had here in the park, an exposed road, and a rock that had burst into a few pieces just from the fire. The archaeology program here in Waterton is very unique in a lot of ways. One thing that makes it unique is the amount of visibility that we had when we first went out on the land after the fire. Normally, plants cover up the entire forest floor, making our jobs much more difficult because they hide the artifacts. Imagine losing a sock in your messy room and not being able to find it. When you clean up the mess, the sock is suddenly much easier to find. That's pretty much how it was for us after the fire with the artifacts. In 2018, we were in a race to beat the plant regrowth. During this time, only site surveys were done with very little digging. In 2019, the focus was the opposite. Lots of digging was done to try to understand the sites and the landforms a little bit more. And there's also a little bit of surveying done when there was time or if there was a rainy day. 2020 was full of report writing since we weren't allowed into the field due to the pandemic. And in 2021, we did a mix of both digging and more surveying. Most recently in 2022, we focused more on training park staff, sharing the work that we've done to the public through different forms of outreach, and also engaging local Indigenous communities. One of the sites we dug at in both 2019 and 2021 is located near the current day bison paddock, which is an area that has a ton of those rock cairns I mentioned earlier, and those create the drive lanes for the bison jumps. Since the site was discovered in the early 1970s, over 120 scraper tools have been found. Scrapers were used to remove the flesh from an animal from the hide, and finding so many scrapers in one place paints a picture that this was a camp where people would process bison and other animals. No other site in the park comes close to the amount of scrapers as this one, indicating a very large bison kill site was likely nearby, and people would come to this area to process the animals. There's a photo on the left right there of a scraper. Another type of archaeological site that we have here in Waterton are classified as vision quest sites. Indigenous people would go to these places to pray and fast with the purpose of gaining sacred knowledge. These are extremely important to protect because they have very significant cultural value. Even though they are often found on mountain ridges or peaks, they often experience disturbances and damage from both people and animals. When people reach the summit of a mountain, they often build a small rock cairn as a way for them to leave their mark. Unfortunately, this act can actually be very destructive because the rocks used for their cairns often come from the actual ceremonial cairns or the sites. So by educating people on the presence of these types of sites, of these types of ceremonial structures, respect and understanding can be developed to prevent future damage to these kinds of sites. Animals, such as bears, have also been known to knock over cairns. They do this while looking for insects underneath rocks. Obviously, they don't understand the significance, but it's still important to note that this is something that actually does happen. From the very beginning of the project, we've worked with many elders and knowledge keepers to have them guide how we want to tell the archaeological story here in Waterton Lakes National Park. And Parks has also made it a focus to hire Indigenous archaeologists, like one of my colleagues, Kevin Blackplume, he is Blackfoot, and also another colleague of mine, Colleen Hughes, who is Métis, and myself, as I mentioned earlier, I'm also Blackfoot. We have also created an Indigenous Archaeology Advisory Committee to create even more dialogue on how to share the work we've done. This committee is made up of elders and representatives from Kainai, Piikani, and Siksika, with each person being chosen by their nations. We've hosted a few events with the committee throughout the summer to bring them out to the land to see exactly how we do our work. One of these days was right after the park did a prescribed fire burn, so the group went out and did an archaeological survey to search for more artifacts and new sites in the recently burnt area. We also managed to bring a few members of the group on a helicopter ride to the top of one of the mountains here in Waterton. This place has a vision quest site that we've known of, and it consistently gets disturbed by hikers and visitors that reach the summit. So we've started conversations on how they want to see these types of special places protected for the future. We also brought a group of youth out from Piikani High School for a couple days in the summer to do archaeological work. The purpose of these days was to share our findings, teach them how to do archaeological surveys, and to potentially inspire some of the participants to become archaeologists themselves. As you can see from the pictures shown here, they had a lot of fun, with some of them even finding artifacts themselves. I still remember finding my very first artifact years ago, so I'm sure these memories will stick with them forever. So this brings us to the part that lots of people have been waiting for, the artifacts. In Waterton, artifacts have 3 general time periods that have been found. These 3 time periods are pre-contact, proto-contact, and post-contact. Overall, during the 3 field seasons since the Kenow Wildfire, the team has identified 80 new sites, found 85 bison skulls, identified 23 material types, visited 350 archaeological sites, found 94 projectile points or arrowheads, and we've found over 20,000 artifacts and collected them total. That's quite a bit, again, for such a small little area like Waterton. And this was all made possible due to the ground being completely cleared from all the plants that normally cover and protect them. So before we talk a little bit more about the artifacts, I want to give a quick definition. When I say the word lithic, I'm really just referring to rocks. It's just a fancy word that archaeologists use to make themselves feel a little bit smarter. Can everyone say the word with me? Lithic. Nice, you're just like an archaeologist now. Most tools are made from lithics, but some are actually made from bone. The bone tools eventually break down since they're organic material. So most of the tools that we do find are rock or lithics. This map right here shows where some of the different lithic materials were found. If you look closely, Waterton is the small red shape there in the middle. I have an arrow pointing towards it to help out. And each of the different colored ovals or circles is where a different type of rock or lithic is found. and someone would have to travel to these different places or trade with another person in order to get these different kinds of rock. Because we have so many artifacts here in Waterton that are made of rock that didn't originate in the area, we must unravel the story of how people managed to transport items such long distances. The location of Waterton perfectly lines up with mountain passes, which were pretty much highway systems for people back in the day. These highways made travel through the area much easier than climbing over the steep ridges, so people would often encounter others while they were on their journeys. As a result, trade happened between groups, which allowed people to obtain things they normally wouldn't be able to. An example of this is the rock called obsidian, and this material was highly prized because of how sharp it can get, and also how easy it is to make tools out of. These photos show some examples of lithic tools. While they're all really cool to see, we're actually only able to tell how old the projectile points are, so the ones in the left photo. This is because so many projectile points have been found in the Great Plains region beside other material that we can date, like bone. From this, archaeologists have been able to make a timeline to accurately show how old each type of projectile point is. In Waterton, there are about 10 sites that have projectile points that are 7,000 years or older. If you think about it, the Egyptian pyramids were made about 4,000 years ago. So 7,000 years is pretty dang old. This picture shows the range of projectile points that we've found in Waterton. The largest are the oldest of them all, with dates reaching up to 10,000 years old. The smaller points have dates that go back several hundred years, which is still quite a long time ago. Another thing to note is the technology change that happens throughout time. The biggest projectile points were put on the end of a spear, so a person had to use their own strength and their own skill to be effective with these tools. The middle-sized ones, we call them dart points, were used on an atlatl. An atlatl was a tool used to throw a dart that often looked like a smaller spear a lot faster because of the extra momentum that you could gain. If you've ever thrown a ball for your dog with one of those toys called a chuck-it, it's pretty much the same thing as an atlatl. It just adds that extra force, making your job much easier. The smallest of them all, the arrowhead, was used with a bow and arrow. These were much easier to carry around, and they still packed the same amount of punch as the other projectile points. So people used these instead of the other methods just because it was more efficient and it weighed a lot less to carry around with you. Here are a couple examples of the oldest projectile points we found during one of our seasons. The oxbow dart point, in the first photo on the left there, dates about 4,500 years ago to 4,100 years ago. The McKean dart point dates about 4,200 years to 3,500 years ago, while the Pelican Lake and Bracken dart points each date to roughly 3,600 years ago to 2,100 years ago. So you might be wondering, what's up with all these weird names that we have for these projectile points? The answer is, typically, points are usually just named after the area that they were first found in. An example of this is the Alberta point. Can anyone guess where that one was found? That's right, here in Alberta. This projectile point is what we call our most unique find of the project so far. Most points actually have a point to them, but this one has a rounded tip. We're still a little unsure of what it could have been used for, but coming up with ideas is always super fun. Does anyone have any ideas of their own? Feel free to share them in the chat box with us below. We can circle back to those answers later if people want to.
We'll give students a little bit. If people want to give their thoughts on this, by all means, share in the chat. And before we get into our Kahoot, I can see their answers and share them. So if you're on StreamYard, if you're on YouTube, we'd love to hear your thoughts about what on earth this thing could possibly be used for. Very cool.
So most of the artifacts that have been recovered during the project or during last season were actually bone. Overall, 13 projectile points were found along with a handful of scrapers, bifaces, and other form tools. The point on in the top left photo was actually found and turned in by a local fisherman. He was out one day on the Waterton River when he stumbled across the beautiful dart point just sitting there on the riverbank. Luckily for us, He knew what to do when you find an artifact, and he called the park warden. By telling us about the artifact, it allowed us to place a date on the nearby site that we previously had no dates for. So every little thing helps us paint the picture of what went on here. If you ever come across an artifact while you're out having fun, make sure to tell somebody. So I just mentioned other form tools, so here's a couple examples of those. Biface is once again a fancy word that we use to say knife. We have a lot of those fancy words in archaeology. A wedge was used to split wood or bone. A shaft straightener was used to make arrows nice and straight. Scrapers were used to remove all the gross stuff from inside the animal hide or to scrape wood. And drills were used to make holes in different things like hide or wood again. Each of these different tools tells us different stories of what went on at a specific site. For example, if there's lots and lots of scrapers found compared to shaft straighteners, the site was likely used to process food rather than for tool production. Artifacts from the proto-contact area are rarely found here in Waterton. These were the years of first contact between indigenous groups and early white traders and explorers. Some of the proto-contact items, as seen here on the slide, have been found in the Blackiston Valley, which is one of the major passes in Waterton. So some of those photos right there, we have a decorative metal item that could have been used on a dress. We have those tiny little beads that we call trade beads. And we also have metal projectile points that were used in trade. Another term that we use in archaeology to describe things is the word feature. These are things that you can't take with you when you leave a camp, like a fire pit or even a building wall. These were also easy to spot after the fire since some of them are actually pretty big. These photos show a couple examples of features, such as a historic midden. Midden, again, is a fancy word for a garbage pit. A fire pit that you can actually see I'm taking soil samples from. Rock cairns, like the ones used in the drive lanes. And also wagon trails that early explorers created when they were looking for different resources. Historical artifacts are also found everywhere in Waterton because of the exploration of white settlers in the early 1900s. The first oil well in Western Canada was established here, so lots and lots of exploring had to be done to find the best places to drill for that. A man named William Aldridge and his family arrived in the park in 1897, and after meeting and getting directed from Kootenai Brown, they found oil seeps in Akamina Pass. By 1898, they were collecting and selling this oil to local farmers. As a result of this work, tons of metal and glass objects are found throughout the passes, with these photos showing a couple examples of those. The first photo on the left there shows a post hole from an old fence post. The second photo shows an abandoned drill pipe that was used to test oil seeps. The third photo shows a natural oil seep that Kootenai Brown was actually shown by some of the local indigenous people when he first arrived. And the last photo there shows the gravestone of William Aldridge's son, Alexander Aldridge, born July 1902, and he died in August 1902. So that just shows that it was a pretty tough place to live during this time. Here's some more photos showing historical buildings and features. The photo on the left shows an old dynamite shack that not many people actually knew about until the fire came through. Luckily, there was no dynamite in that shack when the fire came through. The photo in the top right shows another old trail system, and there's tons and tons of those weaving throughout Waterton. And the photo in the bottom right shows the foundation of an old house. It's kind of hard to see, but in the top right corner there, you can see the 90-degree turn of the building foundation. I've highlighted it with a red line there for you to make it a little easier. On this slide, the first photo here shows an old metal bed frame that was left behind when settlers moved on from the oil city. Beds are pretty heavy things, so you wouldn't want to just haul that everywhere with you. The photo of the hearts in the top middle there are actually metal tobacco tags from an old tobacco tin. Below that photo is a pile of cans. Again, a garbage pile that we call a midden. The photo on the right is a large metal gear from oil drilling equipment. Household goods were left behind as well, such as old pots and pans, utensils, cups, knives, and even ice skates. Items like these show that the people who came to the area brought their entire families with them. Women and children definitely played their parts in the early development years of Waterton. And tons of glass bottles have been found here. These pictures show lots and lots of different kinds that made their way to Waterton. The most common brand was Fritz Six Bottling Company, which was actually located in the nearby Lethbridge, Alberta. During these days, the idea of leave no trace wasn't around yet. Rather than haul the heavy glass bottles out to properly throw them away, explorers and workers would just toss them over their shoulders into the piles that we see today. Other glass and ceramic items like mugs, plates, whiskey bottles, and power line insulators have also been found after the fire, and there's lots and lots of them everywhere. So, if you travel through the park, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to come across an artifact. Knowing what to do if you find something is the key. I briefly mentioned it earlier, so does anyone remember what to do? That's right, you leave the artifact where it is and you tell someone about it. The main thing to do is do not move the artifact. Only permitted archaeologists are allowed to do so in national parks. Then, if you can, try to record a few bits of information, such as the date, your name, the coordinates of the location if possible, and also take photos of the area and the artifact for yourself for later. And then, of course, report the find to the park warden or the visitor center, and they'll get in contact with me or other park archaeologists. Plants, animal antlers, and sheds and rocks are all protected by the park in the same way as artifacts and archaeological sites. So it's just a good practice to do not touch or disturb any of these different things. So what are some of the things that we learned? We learned that new information has allowed us to expand and contract some of the site boundaries that we have. This means that back in the day, when archaeologists first found some of the sites here in Waterton, they weren't able to see the full size of the site because of all the vegetation, so the plants and trees. Thanks to the fire-cleared ground, we were able to see everything and make these adjustments. We were also able to observe and understand how very hot burning fires interact with archaeology, such as artifacts and old buildings. The fire broke apart many of these things, but now at least we know what to look for if this happens again in the future. This work has shown that understanding traditional Indigenous knowledge is the key to protecting archaeological sites in the future. Indigenous people used to burn the landscapes regularly, which prevented massive fires like the Kenow fire from happening in the first place. And finally, we learned that there was tons and tons of trade and travel in the area. Materials to make stone tools found in Waterton come from British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, North and South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. In total, there's 23 different material types which means that people came from all over just to come to Waterton to trade and just for their travels. So that's the end of my amazing presentation today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in to learn more about the archaeology here in Waterton Lakes National Park.
Fantastic. Well, it was an amazing presentation, Dylan, and for us to say that as well, we all certainly enjoyed that very, very much. We've got classes all over Alberta, all over North America and beyond. If you want to exit your screen share, come back with us, have a bit of a conversation. What I'll do first is dive in with our Kahoot. Our game pin is up on the screen. As I'm pulling that up, I'll note that our answers to your question of what that thing was for were carving, scraping, and spears from our Livingston Grade 3 crew. We've also got two other options that came in on YouTube. I like your thoughts here, guys. We have fishing from Mr. Van Leeuwen's class, and maybe to knock something out without killing it from Miss Peterson's class. So a variety of answers there, which I think is very unique and special. So way to go, guys. Thank you for sharing those. Dylan, we're going to dive in with our Kahoot. I'm going to pull this up for everybody now. For those who are new to Kahoot, the faster you answer, the more points you get. And you don't win anything, but you do win Dylan and I's everlasting respect. So we'd love to have you take part. We're going to dive in just a second. I'm going to pull our game pin off our screen here. And let's get to it, folks. Then we're going to dive in with questions. Lots of opportunity to share your archaeology questions for our live classes. We'll also have a way you can share them after the broadcast if you don't get them in live. But let's do this thing, folks. All right, question number one, 20 seconds. What is archaeology? We talked about this at the beginning. Is it study of dinosaurs, study of plants and animals, study of people in their past, study of space. I hope after our half-hour presentation, you guys are paid attention enough with this. But let's dive in. 8 more seconds. 6, 5. Some of you, quite a few of you have this already. That's great. 3, 2, 1. It's not dinosaurs. We established that with a big X through our Triceratops friend at the beginning. Study of people in their past. Very good, guys. Let's see where our leaderboard lies. Giving Hawk takes our lead. I kind of hope a bison creature wins in our scoreboard today, but that's just a bias to stick with our local wildlife. Quiz question number 2. Who can dig at an archaeological site? This is a question we got on YouTube as well. It's something that Dylan highlighted at the end. Can anyone just pick up things and go from there? Only trained archaeologists? Nobody? They're off limits. We got to keep them preserved forever. What do we think? We've covered this quite a bit in various ways throughout our program today. 34 of you already in. 2 more seconds, 1 more second. And the answer, of course, is only trained archaeologists. 90% of you got that right. It's really important that if you find an artifact, you follow the advice that Dylan had in that final slide. Don't just pocket it and walk away. It's really important to make sure the appropriate people know about these things and can chart and understand all the stuff that's going on in these special places. Giving Hawk still has our lead. And this is the last of our actual quiz questions. So the winner will be decided after this one. And we've got 2 more for you guys to wrap up. They're just some fun bonus ones. So how many artifacts were found by the archaeologists total? 100, 500, 1,000, or over 20,000? Seems too many. That's like a ridiculous amount of artifacts, Dylan. I don't know. It could be that much. What do we think? 40 answers in. It is over 20,000. Yes, most of you guys got this right. Fantastic, everybody. So we'll say that might be our leaderboard that I left up there, but we'll get our final tally at the end. Now this one is, did you learn something today that you didn't know before? You learned a lot? Did you learn a little? Or you didn't learn anything? You knew all this. You're actually one of the archaeologists at Waterton Lakes, and this is all, second nature to you. What do we think? No right answers, no wrong answers. We just love to hear from you guys what you think. You can also type to us on the YouTube chat, and then we're going to dive into Q&A right after this with our ABM grade 6 crew. So almost everyone learned a lot. That's fantastic. 5 archaeologists from Waterton Lakes tuned in today. They knew everything, and that's great. It's nice to have some people join in. And then we're going to dive with one final question. Did you like today's program? Hopefully. We want to get your feedback from our Parks Canada exciting things. Did you love it? Did you like it? Were you kind of neutral? Or no, it's not for you. You prefer biology. You prefer dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are where it's at. Almost everyone loved it. That is a very good sign. I think that's particularly exciting. So we're going to get our leaderboard. If you are any of these folks, let us know who you are in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm going to head to our ABM grade 6s in just a second. Classy Panda, number 3, Agent Seal, 2nd place. And first, for all the marbles, our winner, Giving Hawk wire-to-wire victory. Way to go. All right, we're going to dive in with questions, folks. ABM crew, grade 6s, come on in and take us away. Hey, guys.
Hi. I was a Hey, don't be.
I know, you're on YouTube. It's crazy. Do you have a question for us?
What? Yeah. I won the game.
I know it's exciting, but you do have to have questions. So I will come back to you guys in a second, okay? We're going to head to General Crew Hour in Scarborough. If you guys have a question for us, welcome in, guys.
We do. Thank you so much, Jesse and Dylan. My team loves that you're taking such good care there from what we've heard of culture, history, and the park. We brainstormed a bunch of questions, but I'm going to ask you something because I heard the word value, cultural value. My class wondered, would you attach a money value to the artifacts that you found?
That is a pretty good question, but actually here in Canada, it's against the law to buy and sell any actual artifact. So I wouldn't be able to attach any money value to the artifacts because it's actually breaking the law.
Interesting. Are we the only country that's like that? Are there other regions around the world that have a similar policy towards archaeological finds, or just us?
I know in the States, they actually have some more relaxed rules. I think I do know of several people that have bought and sold things, which is not what I want to hear. So I do know off the top of my head that Canada does have the solid policy of no buying and selling.
There you go. And you sort of prevent the trade in it. You prevent people wanting to go and poach archaeological sites because you set that as your policy and guideline. I think that's a really great question, guys. Miss G at Connect, I'm going to head to you guys for a question next. Hello.
Why do you like studying archaeology?
Ooh, Dylan, why do you like studying this, man?
Well, it's because it first started when I was just a little kid. When my mom found that projectile point, it was such a cool feeling to have the idea that the last person that touched that projectile point was about 10,000 years ago. So just connecting to my own culture is such a cool thing for me to do, and I want to keep doing it for as long as I can.
It's a beautiful answer, and I love that you started your talk today with this personal story. I think for anyone who gets the chance to see an artifact and touch it and hold it with their hand, the fact that you brought students there is such a special thing. I've held a few archaeological artifacts at sites like yours before, and it really is just, it's so incredibly memorable to have that opportunity to have a hands-on experience. So great question, guys. We're going to head to Courtney BC, Miss Boland's class. If you guys want to come on in, you're good to go. Hey, guys. Hi.
Everybody else, sit down. Forrest, sit down.
Where did you find most of the artifacts?
Where do you find most of them, Dylan?
Well, I don't think there's any specific area that I can say because the entire national park is pretty much an archaeological site. There's archaeological sites sitting right next to each other, so almost everywhere I go in the park, I can find artifacts.
What a cool thing, the fact that that's possible, the fact that the fire allowed for that level of exploration, and it's making the best of a bad situation. You guys did it so extraordinarily well. We've had the chance to have these two broadcasts with so many students tuning in, so sort of speaks to that universal allure of archaeology, which has been really special. Dylan, I'm going to head to our Livingstone crew, Mr. Poole's class. We'll head back to ABM in a minute, and any YouTube classes, I'll give you guys a shout out in a minute as well. We'll also have a Padlet today, so worth noting for all our classes, if you don't get your questions in live today, or if you have more questions for Dylan, you can use this link below. I'll share that with all our registered groups, and you can inundate them with queries when we're done today's program. But let's head to Mr. Poole's group. Livingston, come on in, guys. Hi.
Okay, we want to give you guys a big thank you first. Can you hear us? Thank you. And we're going to have two rad dudes come up with a question. This is Leo and Caswell. Come on up, guys, and look at my computer. Go ahead.
Hey.
How did the storm start?
Yeah, our fire started. What is that? The question from both of you, or did you have a question as well?
Yeah, Leo,
No,
what were you going to ask? Go ahead.
Like, did the fire start because the lightning strike hit the mountain's ground, or did it hit a direct tree?
Yeah, cool question. So how did our fire start, guys?
The fire started from a lightning strike, and I believe it might have hit a tree. And a lot of the times in forests, there's a lot of what we call fuel. So old dead trees and other vegetation that are just sitting on the ground. So once that gets ignited, the fire just spreads and it goes crazy. And here in Waterton, it's a very windy place. So once you add wind to that, it just spreads very, very fast.
Great question, guys. By the way, I want to note Mr. Poole's class. Welcome in Lundreck, Alberta. And you guys had the best dancer in our countdown at the beginning. And that student has the best hair I've ever seen in a grade 3 kid. So way to go, man. ABM grade 6s, we're going to head back to you guys for a question. Come on in, guys. Hey, yeah, you're up.
So what is the hardest part of being an archaeologist?
Ooh. No pressure.
That's a good question. I would say the hardest part is leaving the field and going back to the lab to actually do all the report writing.
So it's been really interesting because a lot of science is a mix of both. It's a mix of field, it's a mix of doing stuff in the lab. You highlighted that sort of sad year that we all had where you had to only be in the doing report writing. How often are you in the field? Is there like a percentage of your time that you're out where you want to be, or is that standard?
So we can pretty much only go into the field when it's nice weather. So we're typically in the field from May to about the end of August. Okay. And once the snow hits, then we can't really do too much because we'll have to shovel everything out to actually find an artifact, which who wants to do all the extra work like that?
I'm here in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. We've had 2.5 feet in the last week and a half. So I feel your pain. We don't want to have to do that. We'll wait till it's sunny and bright. Folks, I know we could take archaeology questions all day. We went a little bit long today, so I want to make sure you guys can get to your next classes, have that opportunity to share some additional written questions with Dylan. So I will bring up that Padlet again. I'll make sure everybody has this, so please do check that out. Lots more to discover, lots more to cover. You can check more of our Peak Discovery series at the link on the bottom of the screen. We've got some really, really cool programs coming up November 30th and December 7th in English, and the next day in French for caribou and on conservation quests in our Mountain Park series. I hope you get the chance to check those out. Dylan, before you wrap up and before we bring in all our classes to say a big thank you and farewell, is there a final message you want to share about Waterton Lakes, the amazing work that you do, something that we want to leave students with today?
I would say come to our park. It's a beautiful place, and there's so much rich history here that we're constantly finding more about. So come learn.
Come visit. Well, you know what I love about these programs in the Peak Discovery series is we always get so many Alberta classes. So you guys are right down the road. If you get the chance to visit, nothing beats going and seeing these things in person, seeing that landscape in person. You really are in one of the most special places on this planet. So go enjoy, go find Dylan. Go to the front desk and just ask for Dylan, and Dylan will pop out and hang out with you. It'll be a good time. This has been so much fun as always. Thank you guys so much for joining. Classes, I know some of you are new to this. What we're going to do now is bring you all in to say a big thank you and farewell before we wrap up today. ABM grade 6s, Miss Air, Miss Manico, Miss G, Madam Bowler.